What is going on to all my movie fans out there, and welcome to today's discussion. As you all can see from the title of the video, we're talking all things Sinners. We're getting to the spoilers, y'all. We're talking about the beginning, the middle, the end, the post-credit scenes, what worked, what didn't work, the deaths, the meanings of, all that good stuff that the film had to offer. So again, this is your warning, your one and only warning. We're getting to the spoilers, but before we do so, just in case you don't want to be spoiled, you want to hear my thoughts about the film without giving too much away, I do have a non-spoiler review available to watch on my channel, so definitely check that out and then come back and join the conversation. So I've done these in the past and I'm really excited to be back doing these. I only really do these for films that really work for me, that I really enjoy, or there was just things that I didn't like and I like to dive deep into them. So this is on the former. I really enjoyed this film and this is a movie I want to talk about with you all. So the way this is going to operate, it's a free-flowing conversation. It's not going to be as structured as like my movie reviews are. It's just kind of top of mind, what worked for me, what didn't work for me, what did I take away from the scene, what did I love about this scene, what did I think about this death, what did I think about the meaning of and what have you, the ending and what have you. So that's how that's going to go in today's video. So before we get into it, this will be available in podcast form. If you're not following me or subscribe to my podcast on Spotify and Apple and all the different platforms you can listen to things on podcast format, definitely do so by clicking the link in this video. And if you're watching this in video format on YouTube, I appreciate y'all. Hit that like, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and also consider subscribing to the channel. So again, spoilers. Before we get into the movie, just some things to talk about before we break it all down. A little icebreaker, if you want to call it that. I talked about it in previous videos, but I was so excited for this movie. Like, this was one of my most anticipated films. It made it on my most anticipated movies when I made that video at the beginning of this year. I'm a huge Ryan Coogler fan. Been following the brothers since Fruitvale Station, Creed, obviously Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. And same goes with Hailee Steinfeld, True Grit, to where she's at in her career, to Michael B. Jordan, to Wunmi Mosaku, to Delroy Lindo. So this was a film, like, I'm thinking to myself, bro, if this sticks to landing, this will be one of my favorite movies of all time. Like, it has all the elements. Now, as I've said out of my out-of-theater reaction, I still feel this way now. I don't think the film's flawless. I don't think the film's perfect by any means. Like, there are issues that I have with it. But as far as the early outing of 2025, this is, to me, and this isn't saying much because this year hasn't been that great besides like Warfare, which recently came out. And there's some other ones that I thought was okay. But for the most part, this year has been pretty bad, for me at least, for movies. But this is the standout movie of the year, and I think it's going to stand strong for a couple months. You know, we got Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four and Jurassic Rebirth and, you know, Superman and a lot of other stuff that I'm excited for. But so far, this is the best movie of the year, hands freaking down. With all that said, let's get into the plot. Let's break it down. We open this movie in 1932, and we get like this, what do they call it in movie term? I think it's called like a bookend, right? Like, we open the movie with the end of the movie, and we see, you know, Miles Stanton, who I talked about in my non-spoiler review, incredible performance, and this is his first big break. Like, you couldn't tell me that. Like, I thought the kid was a professional. He was so damn good in this movie. But we open the movie with him walking into his father's sermon, and obviously he's got the scratch on his face, he's got the blood on his clothes, he's holding half of his guitar, which is very pivotal in this movie, and we'll talk about how music is so integral in this film. But he walks in, and his dad, we don't know at the time is his dad, but he says, you know, come on in, son, you know, leave your sins behind. You have to let the music go. And he has a hard time letting it go. But what I loved about it is, and Ryan, this being his first like horror film, very immediately within that opening scene, we see the flashes of what happened, right? We see him getting hit by the lead vampire, who we'll talk about, who was excellent. And we see cuts and flashes of the night before. So I love the tone that was set early on. And again, it shows us, as we see, is he gonna let the guitar go? Like, what the hell happened to this boy? We cut to the day before. So in this day before is when we're introduced to our, and I said this in my non-spoiler review, they're the stars. I say they. Michael B. Jordan is the star, but I very much look at this film in the lens of Sammy. I think he is really the heart, the beating heart of this film, but neither here nor there. We're introduced to the twins, Stack and Smoke, and immediately you can just tell. I love how they separate the two, right? You can tell which one is which because of their outfits. One's wearing red, one's wearing blue, which is obviously symbolizing the good and the bad, and it actually plays on reverse. As we'll kind of talk about in this breakdown, I was led to believe that like Smoke who was wearing the blue, who gave me very much like, I'm pretty sure they're identical twins, but obviously one was born before the other. But I feel like Smoke was like big brother energy. Like he was more protective, he was more reserved, he didn't speak that much, but when he did speak, it obviously had, it held weight, and it was very important when he spoke, because again, he was a man of very few words. Where you have Stack, who was, I wouldn't say the more wild child or the wild card, but he was more, carefree, he was more relaxed, he was more of the one that was giving off little brother energy, right? But neither here nor there. We find out that both of these brothers have a past. As we go through the town, we see they have a reputation, they have a history. Like, you don't mess around with the twins, right? And I love how they establish them into this beginning of the film, as we find out early on that they're World War I veterans, and they're purchasing this abandoned warehouse from this white man, and you could tell the energy's off. Like, obviously, Mississippi, it's in the 1930s, racism, Jim Crow era, all that stuff. So as they're setting up the scenario, you see the white man has his gun, and I almost thought that they were gonna kill him, which we'll talk about the ending later. That comes full circle. They buy the abandoned warehouse, and they're preparing to make this into a club, into, as they say in the film, a juke bar. We get all that set up there, which I very much enjoyed, and we transition to Sammy. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, how is Sammy gonna get called into the mix? Well, we find out, which is a great line from the movie. Y'all brothers?
Nah, we cousins.
Well, they actually have cousin, who is Sammy. He gets tied into the mix, but before he goes off with his older cousins, again, we're establishing who Sammy is, right? He works in the fields. He's very much got a good head on his shoulders, working in the fields early, getting all his chores done and all his quota done for the week and for the day, before he can go out and enjoy himself, but more importantly, free himself. The music element of this film, Ludwig Göransson, who was one of my favorite composers. Like, Hans Zimmer's the GOAT to me, right? And obviously you have John Williams and so many other great legends, but Ludwig, in this small window of time, since I think he did Creed, and he did obviously Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, he did Tenet, he's done Mandalorian. The man's resume speaks for itself, but I love how important the musical element of this film was. It wasn't just a gimmick. It was purposeful. It was a character. It was one of the leading characters of this film. And again, very early on, he takes his guitar to go off with his cousins. And again, to me, the music to him, that guitar to him, was his lifeline. It was his way out. It was his way to be creative. It was his way to be free from being black during that time and picking cotton and being the preacher's son and all the pressures that come with his life. Whenever he had his guitar, whenever he had his music, it's when he was free. And we'll talk about what that means for the post-credit scene. But they go into town. We find out very early on, when they go find the truck that's hidden behind the bushes, that this seems to be some type of situation that's illegal, right? We know that they've been in Chicago. There's a line mentioned later in the movie that they don't expand upon it, but you can kind of get an idea what they did in Chicago, working with Capone, right? And the Italians and taking the beer and taking the wine, that they stole it from these men. But you can tell they were up to no good. But one of the themes of this film is that, yes, the twins are not necessarily good guys, but they are good people they want to do good things for the community, even if it is a little illegal. But that's the theme of this film, is these sinners, these people that are good at heart, but they do things that go against the grain. They are sinning, right? They're doing bad things at the same time. So I love the exploration of exploring that. But they go their separate ways to kind of set up for the day, and that's essentially the first half of the film, which I talked about in my non-spoiler review, and would love to have this discussion with you all in the comments. I really enjoyed the first half. As a horror fan and entertainment value, obviously the second half is when the popcorn happens, where the blockbuster of it all comes out, but it's the build-up to that moment that makes those moments have a payoff. You care for these characters. And it was a pull quote that I saw when they were promoting this movie, that someone said, like, this is the Avengers, right? There's a cinematic moment in this film that felt like the Avengers. I don't know if I agree with that, but I can understand the sentiment, as they're essentially recruiting people they've known in the past. So this is, again, the first 45 minutes of this film is them gathering their old friends and family members and people that they had, a bad history with. As we kind of introduce these characters one by one, obviously we met Sammy at this point in the film. As Smoke's going off to do his side mission, we have Sammy and Stack going into the town. Stack is there to get a sign made from that couple was so cool. I really enjoyed them. He's getting the sign made. He tells the girl to honk the horn if someone bothers the truck, which we see. Well, that was one of the funniest moments of this film when the guys that they knew was trying to steal from the truck and he shot him in his ass and he shot the one dude in his leg. Like, we can't have people thinking that y'all can get over on the twins without consequences. So the comedic moments, how that fits into this film, and how Ryan Coogler really did a good job of genre bending. This is a comedy at points. This is a romantic movie at points. This is a very adult, sexy movie at points. This is a thriller. This is a horror. This is a film with commentary and layers. So I loved all that stuff. So we meet the couple that's helping them out. I love the whole bargaining, know your worth. That's another thing that this film has to offer. Know your worth. So while we got them situated, they got their sign. They have the people that's going to help them orchestrate the juke bar. We follow up with Smoke, who we see him interacting with Wunmi Mosaku, who plays Annie. I love Wunmi Mosaku. I love Annie in this movie. I love how she was kind of our window into the supernatural. Like when he goes, first off, we get the emotional beats again, the whole romantic angle and the drama of the film. He drops off the flowers to what we, at the moment, you're not really clear on, like, okay, there's obviously someone he lost, as we find out is I believe it was a son that him and Annie lost at some point. There's clearly a tension between the two because, as we find out from Stack and Smoke, they had to leave Mississippi because of many different reasons, but I think this was one of the main catalysts of why they left, is because he didn't want to face the trauma of losing his son. It's one of the brilliant things about this film for me is Ryan, as any great director should do, rely on the acting, rely on the dialogue to convey the history that we don't see on screen. By their body language, by when we find out Smoke is not a man of many words, but when he does speak, it holds a lot of weight. So I love the scene. You get all the history within that scene between the two, of the tension, the anger, the regret, the decision making for him to leave, and the unspoken unease between the two. One of my favorite scenes of this film was seeing the dynamic between Smoke and Annie. Phenomenal. But then again, this is where the supernatural is being introduced to the film for the first time, because we can tell she's into voodoo, witchcraft. She had her time in the bayou, as they mentioned, Louisiana, and obviously I can't remember the name of it, the mojo, which was something that protected him. And I love, again, even though they have their issues, she's still looking out for her man, right? She re-ups the mojo necklace that he has and blesses it. And this is when they embrace, right? Even though they have their troubled past, even though they have their history, even though they lost a child and they have that trauma of losing a child, they still have love for each other. Like he tells her, what do you want me to tell you? That I loved you, that I missed you? Because it's true. All those things are true. And they have, again, I love that we have a $90 million to $100 million WB blockbuster film that's sexy. That's an adult film. Like, she talking her stuff in his ear, licking his ear, and he do the wham bam thing. Like, I love the sexiness, and I love too that it doesn't go like, it's not like a full on bam bam. Like it's very sexy. It takes its time. It's very mature, and I love, again, the chemistry on screen together. And it's just, man, I love Wunmi Mosaku, and I think she's just such a great actress. She's a chameleon. She can blend into any role. But also, shout out to Michael B. Jordan, man. As I'll be talking about throughout this review, him as Stack and Smoke, distinctively different characteristics. I love how distinct they were, how different they were. And you just got to think about, of course, we've seen dual roles be played. I mean, earlier this year we had Mickey 17, which I haven't seen at the time it's recorded, but I've heard, Robert Pattinson did a good job in playing all those different versions of himself. We've seen him before, but going back to me being a fan of Michael B. Jordan and seeing, Hardball, The Wire, and all the different roles we've seen him in various years, I think for me, Fruitvale Station is his best performance still to date. Him playing, the real life character in Oscar. This role to me, playing the two characters, I think might be my favorite. I still think his best performance is in Fruitvale Station, but my favorite performance so far in his career is what we see as him playing these twin brothers and how well it's played, the arc, the layers, the complexities of the characters. I thought Michael did a great job. So while we established that relationship across town, again, we're still recruiting people. We come into Delroy Lindo's character, who's a legend. He's an icon. Like you talk about chameleon, you talk about a diverse filmography. The man is just a legend, right? So his resume speaks for himself, as does a lot of these actors and creatives in this film have an incredible, extensive resume. But Delroy's the GOAT. He's such a legendary actor. But we meet him, again, the mixture of comedy. When you meet him, he's a drunk. We all know him. He's the old uncle of the situation, right? Like, he has a good heart, but he's a sinner. He makes his money from singing, from being a creative, and the blues, and how much that meant to him and how it's gotten him through some hard times. But my man's an alcoholic. So we see that, and he's like, listen, I love the banter between him and Stack. Sammy gets in the mix, and he also meets his love interest, who, if I were to have a criticism, I wish that relationship, and we'll get back to Stack and Slim here, but I did wish that we would have had a little bit more time and a little bit more characteristics for Jayme Lawson as Pearline, who, by the way, I kept saying to myself, I was watching, like, where do I know her from? Like, I've seen her. It wasn't until I got home that night where I'm like, oh, that's Bella from the Batman and Penguin. She was also in The Woman King, and she was also in something. I'm like, oh, she looks so familiar. Very talented, but a very attractive woman at the same time. The whole cast is a sexy cast, but I wish there was something, a deeper connection between them. I like their chemistry. I'm referring to Pearline and Preacher Boy, and again, they've crossed paths. They make that apparent. They've seen each other in town, and she has her husband who we never meet. But I wish there was like a deeper connection as we get with all the other romantic relationships in this film. But I wish that she would have maybe been, and I know she doesn't work in the field, so she's not gonna go to that church, but I just wish that there was like they knew each other from the past, and I just wish there was a stronger connection. But because what happens later on with her death and how their relationship ends, I didn't buy it. I know that Preacher Boy is a young man. This is probably his first like true romance, and we see what they do a little bit later with the adult stuff that they do. But that was a relationship that I wish was stronger. But either way, we meet them. But going back to Stack and Slim talks about, listen, boy, I know y'all opening a juke bar, but I already got my roots in my business. I ain't trying to cross around, and y'all might be here this weekend, but I don't know about the weekend after next, and so on and so forth. So I like that banter back and forth. But then he's like, listen, he opened up that beer, I believe it was, and which comes from Chicago, and again, his sin, his vice is the alcohol. Oh boy! Yeah! So they rope Slim into the mix, but this is where we're introduced to Hailee Steinfeld's character, who is Mary, and I love the roots of the character, but also the connection from Hailee in real life, and her having I believe her grandfather was half black, and kind of plays into this story that she kind of reached into that personal connection and implied it to this character Mary, who passes as white, but she has black in her in this film, and I love that conversation, the social commentary during that time. She has to marry a white man to keep appearances, but who she really loves is a black man, as we find out in this film with Stack, and he can't love her because of the implications and the danger that it puts on her, which they talk about later. But Hailee, I love this, and it's so crazy because, again, going back to just being fans of these actors and watching them, I remember when she was in True Grit. I remember she was in Bumblebee. She's been in these Edge of 17. Like, I've seen her grow, but I forget that we're really close in age. So it is like, I love that she's such a great actress. So sometimes when you see actors leaning more into being adults, like we're seeing that with Zendaya, we're seeing that with Timothée Chalamet, like they're growing up in front of us, even though they're adults, we're adults. But again, going back to just seeing them grow up in front of you, this is really, at least to me, I've seen most of her projects, but this is the most mature role she's played in her career, and it wasn't off-putting. It was like the stuff she was saying, like when she was talking to Stack, like, you did, I don't want to get this demonetized, but she was talking her stuff, right? And what they do in the bedroom or what have you. And what I'm getting at is sometimes when you are so used to seeing an actor in one vein or in one role or a certain tone, and when they kind of do more mature things, it can be off-putting because sometimes it can feel forced. It doesn't feel natural, even though they're an adult in real life. But it was seamless with Hailee. Like, I bought into it. Her talking her stuff and playing a more mature adult in this situation. And it actually kind of plays to the character because, again, everyone's like, Mary? Little Mary? And, it plays into that. Like, Hailee from True Grit, from Bumblebee is being sexy. And look, I've always thought she was, attractive, especially in the last few years as she's gotten as an actress. She's a fashion icon. She's really expressing herself in her fashion and showing more skin more than ever. And, kudos to her and her most recent announcement with, being married to Josh Allen. So either way, I really, again, going back to dynamics and characters and development, I like that we establish these relationships, these broken relationships, these paths to the characters. It really plays well into the flow of the film. But again, going back to something that I really enjoyed about these established relationships, these broken relationships, these complex, dysfunctional relationships, if you want to call it that, with Stack and Mary, and you also have Smoke and Annie, and how Annie has this really deep belief in prayers and religion, but Smoke is like, well, those prayers and the religion and your voodoo didn't work for saving our son. And then tying that into Mary losing her mother, which was established early on, how Mary's mother essentially raised the two boys. I love, again, that these characters they have their traumas, they have their past, but it doesn't define them. And I like that undertone. I like that theme that we play with in the film. So again, these are the first, 45 minutes of the movie. Again, one of the things I talked about in my non-spoiler review is I very much enjoyed this establishment, these characters interacting with each other. Again, the pool quote of this feel like an Avengers film as we recruit these characters who we come to love and enjoy. I am curious to know how that plays on a rewatch. Like, okay, I like the setup, but does that setup hold? Is it still fun? Is it still engaging on a rewatch? Or am I going to find myself like fast forwarding a little bit to get to the nitty gritty? But I'm very curious on that on a rewatch. But as we move on along, and this is kind of the first half of the movie, we have a really, I don't want to miss this part, when they're back to pick up cornbread. We see them passing by these slaves, and, we have Slim saying, hold your heads up, because he's been in that situation. He knows them, but he's obviously not in the situation anymore. There's a conversation being had about his past and how he lost one of his friends due to a lynching, and that whole story that he told, and again, how music helps them with the grieving process, and how music helped him get through that, and how music keeps him strong and keeps his head up, and how he can lean on that and rely on that, and how music frees them from the things that hold them down, the oppression of the racism, the oppression of being a slave and what have you. And when he's telling that story in the car, again, the way that Ryan relies on the actors to convey a story, to convey a past trauma. We hear the sound design, the music, all that stuff is phenomenal, but we hear the horrors of his friend dying and being lynched and all that stuff. And in the background of this whole conversation, it was a beautiful scene. It was a very emotional scene, and the way Delroy played that, and how, again, the music comes in was just so well done. So I love that moment. Again, we inject the tone, never felt off balance or jarring. We go from a really emotional moment to a kind of comedic moment when they're picking up cornbread, who's played by Omar Miller, and we see Stack is, trying to get him to take some money, help us be the bodyguard for the night. And I love the banter between, when he's like, this is my wife. He's like, I don't give a fuck about you and your wife, but she gonna do you good tonight when she finds out how much money you made. That's the first half. I don't like to look at my phone or my watch during a movie theater because it could be distracting. But, I was like, I wonder how much time has passed. Because, again, I was very much enjoying myself. But minus the trailers, I would say that was about 45 minutes. On my phone, it was like 7:53. But, again, accounting for the trailers that played earlier, it was like the first 40 minutes. No vampires. A little bit of supernatural, at least that there is supernatural elements to this world by the conversation between Smoke and Annie. But now we see the first actual on-screen supernatural moment, and that is our villain of the film, played incredibly by Jack O'Connell, by Remick, I believe was the character's name. Now, question for you all. A thing that was in my mind while watching this scene when we're introduced to him is the sun's coming down, it's about to be night, but we see him jumping into the frame and we see his body's on fire, and we later find out he's being chased by Native Americans. And we'll talk about the scene, but I'm thinking in my head, like, okay, where did he come from? Because it's not night, it's still day. So are we assuming, and there's a whole backstory to, I would love like a graphic novel or like a comic book just going over his backstory, his lore, the lead vampire. But I was so curious, was that something you all thought about? Like, where did this vampire come from in the middle of the day? Like him jumping in frame, like did he fly? Is he hopping around, flying from these vampire hunters? So that was something that I wish was maybe handled differently to kind of, and listen, there's always a thing about movies and storytellers. You don't need to know everything. Some things need to be mysterious, but that was something I was curious about. Like, where did this vampire come from in the middle of the damn day? Anyway, he comes to this couple house who we later find out is associated with the KKK and the nieces and nephews of the Grand Wizard Master, what have you. We see them. And I love this about the lead vampire again. I love that Ryan Coogler, in all of his movies, the villains always have a story. The villains are not just, mustache twirling evil just to be evil. But he's like, you guys need to join me. You need to be a part of this family. And we'll talk about that more later. But he convinces them to let him in. They let him in. You got to invite the vampire. Again, the little lures we've seen from a lot of vampire stuff. The invitation for the vampire. The willingness of the victims to allow him in. So he lets them in. The vampire hunters come in. They're like, listen, there's a guy. He's on the loose. He's not one of us. He's not a human. But, of course, the racism, they're not going to listen to a Native American. So they're like undermining him. She's calling for her husband. He's not answering. She goes in the back. At this point, he's already bitten. He's like, oh, shh. Again, I love the villain in this film. So good. And Jack does such a great job of capturing that sense of like evilness, right? So the husband wakes up, and of course, we know that the wife is also going to transform into a vampire, as we see later in the movie. So at this point, we got the groundedness mixed in with the supernatural, and it's mixing well. It's mixing well so far. We got the juke party. We got the juke bar, to say, up and running. People are having a good time. We got the fish fry. We got the music going. Favorite scene of the movie. And of course, Mary's there. They don't want Mary there because they don't want any drama for the night. And we see Stack and Mary have their conversation. He wants her to go. And also Mary has an interaction with Sammy about music and creativity and all that stuff. Do what you love to do and what have you. But then my favorite scene happens. Delroy introduces, or I should say Slim introduces Preacher Boy, where he's from, introducing himself. Miles as Sammy, aka Preacher Boy. That song is incredible, but the scene, they mentioned early on, at the very beginning of the movie, I should say, they talk about how music, there's certain people that can, the way that they sing, the way that they display music can transcend time and space.
And pierce the veil between life and death.
It can go to the past and it can interact with the future. So with that knowledge, we see Sammy diving into his superpowers, if you want to call it that, dive into the ancestors. And we see all these various different cultures within this scene. We see all these various different time from people from before the blues and after blues. We go to people from the 90s, from the West Coast, and we see people twerking. We see people dancing, celebrate. I love that scene. I love how it implies that music is something that has carried on from generation to generation, from century to century, and it's something that brings us together. I'm not much into music as I used to be as a kid, just because I don't listen to new music. I listen to a lot of the older music I grew up with, and that's my way of enjoying music, is old music, which is now considered old, I should say. But I love that no matter where you come from, your skin color, your financial situation, music is something that can break barriers. And I love, again, how music is so pivotal in this movie. And again, it's used as a metaphor of freedom, but it's also used as an allegory of, bringing people together. So I love how that was implied in this film, and I love how the scene shows that. It is the most effective scene in the film to me. It's my favorite scene of the year so far, and I think it's going to be in my top 5 by the end of the year as the camera's moving around. And there's so many, again, we could be here for hours, me talking about the camera work in this film, the different oneers, the different aspect ratios that are implied in this film. Again, the score is obviously, as we're talking about here, is beautiful, but the use of the camera and just being in the moment. It's the one time in the film I think the characters would say they were at their happiest too, right? When it was just them and the music, right? There's no slaves, there's no racism, there's no different class, there's no, none of that. It's just they're in the moment, and I love that moment. And then we pan out, and there's the fire, and the barn is completely gone, and we just see them with all the different ancestors having a good time. But then the vulture culture vampires are outside the barn, and that's where we get the motivations of our main villain as he expresses, and as we learn this film, that he takes on the memories of his victims, but he's yearning for stories, because the immortality, and I just love vampire lore in general, but the idea of someone living throughout time, how much they lose, how much they gain, so on and so forth. What does it mean to live on forever? What does it mean to be free? We see the main vampire's goal is to turn Sammy into a vampire, for he can retain his memories to go back to when he was pure, when he wasn't a sinner, right? When he had a soul, when he can go back to his Irish roots, which we see him doing later in the film. So I love that that's the goal of the vampire, and I love how, again, Michael B. Jordan, Hailee Steinfeld, Wunmi Mosaku, Delroy Lindo, they're on the marquee. They're selling the film. You got to have them selling the film. But it's very much Sammy's story. He is not the MacGuffin, but he is the leading force. He is the fundamental understanding of this film is the importance of music, but Sammy being the embodiment of that. So I love that connection, those ties. So that's the motivation. At this point, they approach the juke bar. They're trying to get in. I love that song that they played. And again, it's just like, all right, y'all got a little bit of rhythm, right? A little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. But they're very suspicious, obviously, because of the times, and you can't trust, white people at night during this time. So they don't let them in. Mary talks to Stack and says, listen, my appearances, I can talk to them, figure out if they have the money, because there's another thing too that I forgot to mention is, Smoke is very upset about some of these people at the party is only able to pay with like wooden coins and, little things of payment that doesn't, pay the bills. But as they talk about, as Annie tells him, this is what they can afford. This is what they have. This is their currency and whatnot. We later find out that they need money because they're not going to be lasting long. But anyway, they don't invite them in. But Mary tells Stack, I can use my complexion to talk to these people and figure out if they have the money, because I know y'all need money. And this is where she talks about Capone and the Italians. They're going to be looking for y'all because y'all stole for them. It's just a matter of time. But let me help you out. So Mary goes out to talk to the trio led by the lead vampire. They're playing music. And Mary's, at first she's getting a vibe. She's vibing them out. And then they talk about her mother passing. And he wished that he could have saved her mother. And she can be saved by him. He's trying to, again, the hero. He's the hero of his own story, which Ryan Coogler does, Killmonger. There's never like good or evil. It's not black and white with Ryan Coogler characters. There's always gray areas. They're playing in the gray. But Mary's like, all right, I'm good. She points the gun at him and she walks away. And again, I love how Ryan plays with horror, right? He's restrained. We don't really see the violence up until this point, but it's implied as we see him levitate in the air. It's like, oh, okay. And then obviously it's implied that we see later on she was bit on the back. She gets invited into the club. Again, her soul has been removed. She's now taken on the embodiment of the soulless evilness of the vampires. She calls Stack into she kisses him, shows him the gold. They go in the back. They do their adult thing. In the meantime, there's a fight going on at one of the tables. Some guy gets cut in the face. Smoke's looking for Stack. He tells Sam to go find his brother. He doesn't find him. He walks in on him in a funny moment between Slim and Sammy when he walks in on him. It's like, oh, is he busy? That was funny. We see Smoke goes into the room and he sees Mary literally on his brother's neck, obviously sucking the blood out of him, and he's shocked. And Mary gets up and it's like, it's not what it looks like. And she literally smokes her. She laughs. He gets up.
We gonna kill every last one of you.
And, walks out and all that stuff, and he sees his brother. Very emotional moment. Again, Michael B. Jordan did this thing when he thought his brother he did die. Technically died. But I love the emotions in that scene, but I also love the tension. And again, this is the first act of violence in the film, and when the brother sees this, right, of course they've gone to war, they've seen blood, but this is him. He's always protected his brother, and now he lost his brother in this moment. I love that moment. I love that scene. She bursts out of there because I think Wunmi, she throws like garlic in her face, and she runs out at that point. Brings me to this point. I talked about it in my non-spoiler review. I'm gonna talk about it now. This isn't the movie's fault, but I still got to bring it up. Warner Brothers and the marketing team in the second trailer for this film gave away all the big surprises. One of them being Hailee Steinfeld gets turned to a vampire. Obviously, when you see her in the light earlier in the movie, you're like, oh, she can't be a vampire because she's obviously walking the light. So it's like she eventually turns to a vampire. But that was taken from me because I saw that in the trailer. Another point in case is we find out who another vampire is, and that is the Stat character, the other twin Michael B. Jordan plays. He becomes a vampire. That's in the second trailer. That's like the tail end of that trailer is him. Clearly he's been changed. So I'm like, I knew that this was coming. Now, to the positive to the film, I didn't have any context, and even though I knew these things were going to happen, it still it flowed well into the movie, right? So it wasn't... It didn't ruin the film for me that I knew certain elements was going to happen because I didn't have the context. But I say all that to say, boy, I would have loved to have experienced that, knowing that was going to come, right? I compared this film to, in my review, 30 Days and Nights meets Fright Night, but in particularly meets From Dusk Till Dawn, which is my favorite horror vampire film of all time. A lot of similarities. Seth and Richie, criminals, on the run. Stack and Smoke, brothers with a history, on the run, criminal background. They come across a family. Obviously, there's no family, but they come across other characters. They go to a bar. They create a bar. There's vampire. There's a lot of similarities there. I am so curious. I think From Dusk Till Dawn came out in 96. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe it came out in 96. If you were someone that saw that film in the theaters, I was not old enough to see that film when it came out in theater. Obviously, I've seen it because it's my favorite film, but I saw it much later. And when I first saw it, I knew it was a vampire movie, but I didn't obviously know how it all played out. But I say all that to say, if you were someone that saw that film in theaters, and if you remember, because I looked up the trailer, but obviously the trailers they show that they're vampires. Do you remember when they marketed From Dusk Till Dawn, if it was marketed with the vampires being in the trailers and being in the marketing? Let me know in the comments. I would love to revisit time and space. I would love to go back in the time machine to see how they marketed that film, if that was spoiled in the marketing or if they kept that a secret. But again, I was very upset with the marketing from Warner Brothers. They gave those things away. Again, it didn't ruin the film, but I wish I could have experienced this movie without knowing what I knew about those moments. But either way, Stack, bitten, led to be believed to be dead. Again, Wunmi Mosaku is Annie. She's realizing two and two together. Like, you shot her multiple times. She ran out. She needed to be invited. These are vampires. Here's one of my issues with this film. The lore, the mythology, the understanding of vampires and their place in this world. Of course, it's a grounded world, but now it's supernatural elements. I just wish that, again, and this is where I talked about it in my non-spoiler review, that I wish the vampire elements could have been maybe sprinkled throughout that first half. When we're meeting those characters, I wish we could have maybe followed Remmick's character a little bit more and got a little understanding of where he comes from, the vampire lore, and just introducing it earlier on in the film, because it's not rushed. I wouldn't use that word, but I feel like there was more exploration of what the understanding of vampires are in this world. There's witchcraft, there's vampires, are there, sorcerers, are there werewolves? Like, I'm so curious about the supernatural elements within this film, because she knew all that stuff, right? She knew the invitation. She's the one, From Dusk Till Dawn. She's the one that provides them with the garlic, the sunlight. The things we've seen in vampire lore before, minus I like, the red eyes. I like the drooling, which was so cool when they were hungry. At first, I'm like, what is that? I'm like, oh, they're hungry, so they're drooling. I like that little added feature there. But again, she's the one that's explaining to them what all this means in this world. But I wish, this is a nitpick. It didn't ruin anything, but this is just something I wish could have been expanded upon, could have been explained. not a textbook. I didn't need the Bible of this world, but I just needed more context to what vampires mean in this film. And I almost wish, and this is just going back to me knowing certain things behind the scenes, like a year before this movie was even announced, I had heard about this movie. And from what I remember, it was initially pitched as the KKK are vampires and the black people are trying to kill the vampires, or there were black people that were vampires trying to kill the KKK. It was one or the other. And you can see those elements in this version of the film, but I almost wish that there was a more of a tie to these characters, because as we find out later, Remick just so happened to come across the KKK family that he converts to vampires, and they just so happened to be the nieces and nephews of the headmaster. So all that stuff was just a coincidence. But I wish there was a deeper lore and mythology to this land, to these people, to this community, where it's like, you don't go out at night, right? There are rumors that there are vampires lurking around the outskirts of the town, that it does have deeper roots to the maybe racist people in the town and different things of that nature. So I did wish that there was, I don't want to say better, but I wish there was a way to incorporate the vampires and the lore specifically to this town and its people. I need to correct myself, because I said Annie figured out that they were vampires after Mary, but correction, it was actually when Cornbread tried to come back in. He tried to, invite me in. He takes Smoke's arm, tries to bite him, doesn't bite him, tries to get the money. But that's when she realized, you just shot him in the face. Mary was able to run out. That's when she brings up the whole vampire thing. So at this point, they're setting up the whole, we need to defend ourselves for the night. And as we have the temptation being offered, the sin, the acceptance of becoming a vampire by Remick, we see them again denying him. But this is where Grace is like, my husband's out there, my daughter, because they threatened to kill the daughter, Lisa, I believe her name. And she's so upset, which is like the Star-Lord moment when she says, come in, mother effers. And obviously they hear that. And this was a nitpick for me, and this was where I felt like this was the plot armor, the plot conveniences. You got not 100, but it was well over 30 to 50 people outside of the vampires that were welcome in. They have their steaks, they have their garlic, and also, too, even before that scene, there was the whole who's a vampire amongst the living, and that moment was kind of silly, because, like, none of y'all got bit, even though I know they saw the guy on the floor, but that was kind of a silly moment to me. It didn't take me out, but I thought it was just silly. Like, clearly none of you all were bit, and, of course, Slim has that moment where he's just tweaking out. But either way, plot armor. They're running in full steam. And they're shooting them, stabbing them. Mind you, these are vampires. There's a lot of chaos going on. You telling me they're able... This is a nitpick. This isn't a big criticism, but it did kind of bother me because everything's so tight, so put together, so well executed. That moment to me was like, obviously, Elliot, we're dealing with supernatural. You have to suspend your disbelief at some point. But again, it's just like, I hear that, but that's just an excuse because the film was so well put together that this is something that stood out to me. Plot armor, conveniences. We got Grace, you got Coraline, you got Preacher Boy, Annie, Stack, or Smoke, and Slim. We got like 6-7 people at max versus, again, these 50 vampires coming at them. And there are some there's people that died in that scene, right? Grace dies in that scene. We have this, which the sacrifice of Slim was a little bit rushed to me. Like, I felt like those characters, we've grown to love them, and the way that they went out was kind of course, I knew they were going to die, but I just wished it was executed better, and we would have had a moment to really take in those deaths. But there are people that died, but I felt like it was just the way it was constructed. It felt a little tropey, very structured, like typical vampire movies, and I just wish it was executed better. Like, I wish there was some way to explain there's only a certain amount of vampires that could have came in. There was like a barrier of like, we have Annie who was able to use her powers or her voodoo to, I don't know. I just feel like the way that was executed just didn't work for me. But either way, at this point, they're trying to escape. They're trying to get Sammy out because they realize that he's the main objective, that they want Sammy, but he tries to get out. This is where Stack comes up, and they're fighting each other. Mary runs off because he warns her, which plays into the mid-credit scene. But they're fighting. The main vampire is fighting. They jump off the edge of the barn. He has his guitar. He slices his face with the guitar. I'm not a fan of hive minds, meaning that if you take down the one lead vampire, which they talk about this earlier, they do this in a lot of movies. You take down the one helicopter, shuts down the whole system. You take out the one guy, kills off the whole, we've seen it a million times. I'm not a fan of that trope. He hit him upside the head with the guitar, and all the other vampires feel it, and it has silver in it, so it's effective. That's why I was able to cut through his skin, and we know silver can be used to effectively hurt vampires. So he does that. He's trying to, and again, I'm not a fan. This is where, again, it felt, I guess I did feel rushed. It felt, the execution didn't really work for me, because now we have the whole tropey. A villain explains his whole life, right? He, just bite him. Why are you telling him all this? You have him in your hands. You can literally bite him. But again, the film wants you to obviously, the credits would have ended if that would have happened. But anyway, we end up seeing that Smoke managed to get away from his brother. You're led to believe that he killed his brother, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Comes down, he stabs him in the heart, and all the other vampires feel this, but at this time the sun's rising, all the other vampires are being burnt by the fire, and of course the lead vampire is being burnt at this point in the film, and Sammy and Smoke are the only ones that survive the massacre. Also, I forgot to mention again, talking about the weight of the feeling of the characters dying, we lost Pearline during that commotion, that whole setup in that fight. We lost, as I mentioned, Slim sacrifices himself, but we also lost Annie. This is a moment that worked effectively with the character's death. When Annie's dying at the hands of Smoke's brother, Stack, and he's telling him, you need to convert, you need to buy into it. And obviously they had the Gamora, Peter Quill moment, which is like, if I get turned, kill me. And we see the moment play out. But that was a moment that I appreciate, because you felt the grief, you felt the emotion, but the other characters not so much, at least for me, especially with Soldier, I keep calling Soldier Boy, especially with Sammy, Preacher Boy, and him seeing Pearline die. Like, y'all just all this stuff's done. Anyway, it's daytime, and again, this is where we catch up to the beginning. Sammy takes a car to go back to his dad's. Meanwhile, Smoke stays back. We find out during one of the moments about them being free, right? You're never going to be free because you're black in America in the 1930s and the Jim Crow era is never, this is a fantasy, this is a delusion. They're never going to give you, your 40 acres and a mule. So, and they tell him, lead vampire tells them that this was a kill box, that this was all set up. They were going to kill you guys the next day, but now let's be a family. Let's have our own, freedom, essentially, right? Forever. We see that Smoke stays back because he knows that the KKK is coming. And this is because in the back of my mind, again, the trailer, and this wasn't really that spoiled. I just knew that it was coming eventually when he had the Tommy gun and the grenade. That scene plays out very Django, very Inglourious Bastards as far as taking out the evil. There are more evils on this world than the vampires, and it's the racism, right? So they come out, he takes them out, grenade. It's a straight up Rambo scene. Michael B. Jordan, we know he's an action star. He plays it really well. It's very believable. He does get shot. He takes out the lead master, but he's shot in the stomach, but he's wounded. But we see very beautiful scene. Again, Ryan Coogler knows how to handle drama and emotions and payoffs. He sees, as he's shot, he's on the ground. He asks for a cigarette. He's about to kill the main KKK leader. But then he sees, he's in between life and death. He sees Annie with their child. She's in all white. She's breastfeeding it. Very symbolic, very beautiful scene. And she's just like, you can come, but you gotta put out the smoke, right? And that's what they call him, Smoke. He shoots the KKK guy, and then he's able to hold his son. Very beautiful moment, very emotional payoff. Again, Sammy goes back, and we essentially end the film at that point. And again, it's a very emotional payoff. But now we get to the mid-credits. So the first mid-credits scene in the film, we're now in, I want to say it's October, so I think it's the anniversary of the massacre. And it's 1992, if I'm not mistaken. We see Sammy, who's actually played by a real-life blues player who's legendary in the blues industry. He's playing the Sammy all grown up. At this point, I would probably say he's in his 70s or 80s. But he has his own club. He moved out, right? That was his freedom. Music was his way out. There was a conversation earlier in the film about getting out of Mississippi, even though the twins didn't want him to leave because they were under the impression that he would go down the path and follow the trajectory of them, which were becoming criminals. But no, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to follow his creative, his freedom was the music. So he has a bar that plays blues. Then in the night, everyone's gone. And then you hear the security guard say, or the bouncer, hey, there's two people that want to see you. Can they come in? Yeah, invite them in. And as soon as they said invite them on, I'm like, it's obviously vampires. But I'm like, which ones? And I'm like, wait a minute, we didn't see the body of Mary or Stack. And then they show us the flashback that Mary escaped, and also Stack wasn't killed by his brother, but he made a promise to not kill his family. To me, I'm like, well, he didn't have a soul. They're sinners. They're vampires. They don't have a moral compass. So he kept the promise. And the only reason I can see that he kept that promise is because it was family. I don't know. I'm still kind of confused about why he kept that promise to his brother all those years later, even though he didn't have his soul. But either way, he kept the promise. And, you know, they got the 90s hair. Hailee's dressed all up. Mary's all dressed up to fit the time period they're in. I love this mid-credit, and I love the conversation. He pays him, pays his respects. Essentially, he smells that he's going to be dying soon. He doesn't want to be turned to a vampire. He doesn't want to succumb to the evil. He doesn't want to lean into the evil. He wants to be pure and go out on his own ways. So, and they talk about that night being the fun night. I love that. That is a wonderful epilogue, if you want to call it that, or in this case, a mid-credit scene. I really enjoy that scene a lot. And the end credit, you know, some people might, oh, that's kind of wasted, but I actually love that moment that we see. The very last post-credit scene is we see Sammy in his father's church playing his guitar. And that, to me, again, is the thesis of this film, is that's when he was at his freest. That's when he felt the most comfortable, is him playing his guitar. Didn't have to worry about the races, didn't have to worry about anything but him and the music, which again is a big part of this film. So that's when he was truly free. In my mind. That's it. That's the breakdown. That's the pros, the cons, the things I thought about while watching it. Again, it was kind of scattered, but it's just a conversation I want to have with you all. As I said in my normal review, I really enjoyed this film. I plan on seeing it again to maybe, you know, some of my issues or nitpicks might be resolved on a second rewatch. You can watch my review to see my score, but I recommend it. I want you all that complain about sequels, prequels, redos, Disney, Marvel, all that stuff, and you want original films, well, you have one in theaters right now. It's a pretty damn good one, so check it out. That's the end of the video. That's the end of the breakdown. Full spoilers of Sinners, a very enjoyable, entertaining film with a lot of great commentary, beautifully made, great score, great acting, and the way it ends, we can have a prequel. You know, I'm talking about originality, but if Ryan wants to franchise this based on an original IP, you can go prequel. You can follow Remick in his past. You can go with, obviously, a sequel, or even what were Stack and Mary doing all those years. And, of course, you can go on into the future. So there's potential, depending on the box office and depending on if Ryan Coogler wants to do it. But I would be open to it, but we'll see. We'll see. Like, share, comment if you're watching this in video format on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you're listening to this on a podcast or watching it on Spotify, because there are video options on Spotify. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Follow my podcast. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget, you're all awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next video.